All right, are you ready to like really get into it with the crankshaft position sensor?
I think we're going to have some fun with this one.
We are diving deep today. And trust me, this little component, it's a lot more important than it might sound at first.
It really is.
We're working from this really detailed guide we found all about the symptoms and the testing and even replacement.
Yeah, all the stuff you need.
So yeah, we'll be like your shortcut to instant car mechanic expertise.
You know, it's funny. It's fascinating to me how just this one sensor
Yeah.
is like absolutely critical in modern engines.
I mean,
It's not just about starting your car.
yeah.
It's about keeping it running smoothly,
Yeah.
efficiently.
So no more like sputtering coughs from our engines.
Hopefully not.
What's the magic behind the sensor then?
Well, it all starts with the crankshaft.
Okay.
You know, it's connected to the pistons, and as they're pumping up and down, the crankshaft is what translates that into rotational force.
Oh.
And that's what actually powers the car.
Okay, so it's taking that like powerful up and down energy and turning it into what, spinning wheels?
Exactly.
Okay.
But here's the thing. For your engine to run perfectly, especially with, you know, all the computer controls in modern cars,
Yeah.
it needs to know precisely where the crankshaft is
Oh, wow.
at any given moment.
Okay.
That's where our star sensor comes in.
So it's like a GPS tracker, but for the heart of your engine.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
I like that.
The crankshaft position sensor is constantly monitoring the crankshaft's position
Okay.
and speed. And it's sending this data to your car's computer,
Right.
the ECU, which uses it to manage things like fuel injection and ignition timing.
Ah, so it's like a conductor making sure all the instruments in the engine orchestra are like playing in sync.
Precisely.
Yeah.
I like that. And without that precise timing, you get all sorts of problems.
Right.
You know, we were talking about symptoms earlier.
Yeah.
Things like rough idling, decreased fuel efficiency. Those are often like the first signs
Oh, really?
that your crankshaft sensor might be on its way out.
That makes sense. If the conductor's signals are off,
Right.
the music's going to be a bit rough.
Yeah,
And I bet there are like even worse consequences if things get really out of whack.
absolutely.
Oh, no.
A failing crankshaft position sensor can cause misfires, stalling,
Oh, wow.
even make your car really difficult to start.
Okay.
Imagine being stuck on the side of the road
Right.
because this tiny sensor decided to call it quits.
Okay, now that's getting my attention.
Oh.
So let's say you start noticing some of these symptoms, right? Rough idling.
Okay.
Maybe your gas mileage like takes a dip.
Yeah.
What's the next step? Do we just assume it's the crankshaft sensor?
Well, that's where the detective work comes in.
Okay.
It's important to remember that those symptoms could be caused by other issues as well.
Yeah.
But understanding the specific signs of a bad crankshaft sensor
Okay.
can help you really narrow it down.
So let's talk about these symptoms. Right.
What should we be listening for?
Yeah.
Smelling for?
One of the most noticeable signs, and probably the most unpleasant,
Yeah.
is a strange smell
Okay.
coming from your exhaust.
Right.
If you start smelling sulfur
Ooh.
or raw gasoline, that's a red flag.
Definitely not the kind of air freshener you want in your car.
No, it's a sign that the fuel isn't burning properly,
Okay.
which can happen when the crankshaft sensor isn't providing the right info
Got it.
to the ECU.
Okay, so that's one to watch out for.
Yeah.
What else should we add to our crankshaft sensor symptom bingo card?
Let's see.
Okay.
Another common sign is decreased fuel efficiency.
Okay.
If you suddenly notice you're filling up your tank
Yeah.
way more often than usual,
Yeah.
it could be because a faulty sensor is throwing off the fuel-air mixture,
Okay.
making your engine work harder.
So it's not just the inconvenience of stopping for gas more.
Right.
It's hitting your wallet harder.
Yeah, it's not good for the environment either.
And then there's the dreaded rough idling.
Ugh, yeah, I hate that feeling of the car like shaking,
Yeah.
like a washing machine on spin cycle when I'm stopped at a light.
You know that shaking is usually caused by the engine not firing smoothly. And again, the crankshaft sensor plays a key role in making sure everything fires in the right order.
So far, we've got smelly exhaust,
Okay.
poor fuel economy,
Yeah.
and rough idling.
Mm-hmm.
What else should we add to this list of crankshaft sensor woes?
Well, there's also misfiring cylinders.
Okay.
This can feel like a sudden jerk or
Right.
hesitation when you accelerate.
Yeah, it's almost like the engine skips a beat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's because the spark plugs aren't firing at the right time,
Okay.
potentially due to bad data from the crankshaft position sensor.
Yikes, that doesn't sound good for the engine in the long run.
You're right.
Okay.
If this happens frequently,
Yeah.
it can lead to more serious damage down the line.
We've got smelly exhaust, poor fuel economy, rough idling.
Yeah.
Sudden jerking.
Oh.
I'm starting to think I need a bigger bingo card.
Well, let's add another one.
Okay.
Delayed acceleration.
Okay.
Have you ever stepped on the gas and felt like your car was taking its sweet time responding?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like it's thinking about whether it wants to go faster or not.
Yeah, that hesitation could be your crankshaft sensor,
Okay.
failing to report the engine speed accurately,
Uh-huh.
leading to a delay in the timing of the spark and fuel delivery.
So it's not just about the sensor itself failing,
Right.
but also about the information it's sending or not sending to the
Yeah.
rest of the engine.
Precisely. It's
Wow.
all about the flow of information
Okay.
and how crucial the crankshaft position sensor is
Yeah.
to that process.
All right. I'm starting to get a real feel for how this one little part can cause just like a cascade of issues.
Yeah, it can.
But let's be honest. There's one symptom we haven't mentioned
Okay.
that strikes fear in the heart of every driver.
You're talking about the dreaded sometimes it starts, sometimes it doesn't problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I call the automotive equivalent of a coin toss.
Yeah.
Is this a crankshaft sensor issue too?
It absolutely can be.
Okay.
Remember, the crankshaft sensor tells the engine where it is in its rotation.
Mm-hmm.
If that signal is faulty,
Yeah.
the engine might not know when to inject fuel or spark the plugs,
Oh, right.
leading to those really frustrating starting problems.
So it's like the engine saying, I don't even know where to begin.
That's one way to put it.
All right.
And when an engine can't even get started,
Right.
you know there's something seriously wrong
Yeah.
with the communication system.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good list of symptoms here.
Yeah.
Smelly exhaust,
Okay.
poor fuel economy,
Yeah.
rough idling,
Yeah.
jerking acceleration,
Yep.
delayed acceleration,
Wow.
and even starting issues.
Go a long list.
But there's one last big flashing warning sign we can't ignore.
Of course, the dreaded check engine light.
Ugh, that little beacon of, uh-oh, something's wrong.
Right.
Does that always mean a crankshaft sensor problem, though?
Not necessarily.
Yes.
The check engine light can be triggered by a whole host of issues,
Right.
but a failing crankshaft sensor is definitely one of the usual suspects.
So if that light comes on, it's time to head straight to the mechanic.
Yeah. It's always wise to get it checked out
Okay.
sooner rather than later,
Right.
ignoring a check engine light, especially when you're experiencing other symptoms like the ones we've discussed,
Yeah.
could lead to much bigger problems
Right.
down the road.
And those bigger problems usually equal bigger repair bills.
Right, which nobody wants.
Which nobody wants.
Right.
And there's one more symptom we should mention,
Okay.
which you might notice on your dashboard.
Yeah.
You mean like when the RPM gauge starts doing the jitterbug
Yeah,
when it should be steady?
exactly.
What's going on?
Yeah.
Am I at idle or am I flooring it?
That's another possible sign of a failing crankshaft sensor.
Oh, wow.
If the sensor isn't sending consistent data
Okay.
about the crankshaft's position,
Mm-hmm.
it can lead to those erratic RPM readings.
So it's like the sensor is sending mixed messages,
Yeah.
and the engine is just as confused as I am looking at the gauge.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Okay.
The engine relies on that steady stream of information
Right.
from the sensor.
Uh-huh.
And when it gets disrupted, things can get pretty unpredictable.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
We've learned what the crankshaft position sensor does, why it's so vital,
Uh-huh.
and even got like a crash course in diagnosing the symptoms of a failing sensor.
Right.
And it's worth repeating.
Mm-hmm. Even though we've outlined all these symptoms,
Right.
they could also point to other issues.
Yeah.
That's why having a professional diagnose the problem
Mm.
is always the best course of action.
Absolutely. But before we send everyone rushing off to the mechanic, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about how to actually test this elusive sensor.
Right.
You mentioned some specialized tools earlier.
Right. There are two main methods for testing a crankshaft position sensor,
Okay.
using a multimeter or an oscilloscope.
Ooh, those sound fancy. What exactly do they do?
A multimeter measures electrical properties like voltage and resistance,
Okay.
which can help you determine if the sensor is sending the correct signals.
So it's like taking the sensor's pulse, making sure it's still alive and kicking?
Exactly. You're essentially checking for continuity in the circuit,
Okay.
making sure the sensor is outputting the expected voltage levels.
And what about that oscilloscope?
Okay.
That sounds even more high-tech.
An oscilloscope allows you to visualize the waveform
Oh, wow.
produced by the sensor,
Okay.
which can provide a lot more detailed information
Right.
about its operation.
So it's like looking at the sensor's brain waves,
Yeah.
making sure they're firing in the right pattern.
You're getting the idea.
Oh.
A healthy sensor will produce a very consistent waveform,
Mm-hmm.
while a faulty one might show irregular spikes or dips,
Right.
indicating a problem.
This is all starting to sound pretty technical.
Yeah.
Is this something the average car owner can tackle themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or is it like best left to the pros?
It really depends on your comfort level with car repairs
Mm-hmm.
and whether you have access to the necessary tools.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But let's say you've done the tests, right?
Yeah.
And you've confirmed your suspicions.
Yeah.
The crankshaft sensor is indeed waving the white flag.
Right.
What's the next step?
Okay.
And more importantly, how much is this going to hurt my wallet?
The good news is that replacing a crankshaft position sensor is typically a relatively affordable repair.
Okay, phew. Give me the numbers, though.
Okay.
Because relatively affordable is a pretty subjective term.
You're looking at a range of about $120 to $400
Okay.
for both parts and labor, depending on the make and model of your car and the labor rates in your area.
All right. That's not too bad, especially considering all the trouble
Right.
a failing sensor can cause.
Yeah.
I'd much rather spend a few $100 now than risk getting stranded on the side of the road
Exactly.
or having to deal with more serious engine damage later.
It's a classic case of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah, for sure.
A relatively small investment in replacing the sensor now
Right.
could save you a lot of headaches,
Yeah.
potentially more costly repairs
Mm-hmm.
down the line.
So we've talked about the symptoms, the testing,
Yeah.
even the cost of replacing this crucial sensor.
Mm-hmm.
But there's one question I have to ask before we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Okay.
What makes these sensors go bad in the first place?
That's a great question.
We've talked about the symptoms,
Wow.
but what are the underlying causes?
That's an excellent question, and it's actually a perfect segue
Ooh,
into the next part of our discussion,
I love a good cliffhanger.
where we'll unravel the mysteries behind why these seemingly simple sensors sometimes decide to throw in the towel.
I can't wait to delve into the root causes of these sensor failures.
Yeah.
For now, we'll have to leave our listeners in suspense.
Stay tuned for part 2,
Okay.
where we'll explore all the factors that can lead to crankshaft position sensor failure.
It's going to be a fascinating journey into the underbelly of your engine.
It is. All right, so let's get into these underlying causes.
Okay.
It's like a medical mystery, you know?
Yeah.
Figuring out why this vital component goes haywire.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So what are the usual suspects in these crankshaft sensor mysteries?
Okay.
Is it just old age, wear and tear?
Wear and tear is definitely a major factor. I mean,
Okay.
these sensors are working nonstop
Yeah.
in a pretty harsh environment.
Right.
I mean, think about it. They're exposed to constant heat,
Yeah.
vibration,
Mm-hmm.
and all sorts of grime under the hood.
Yeah, it's like trying to read a book in a hurricane. No wonder they eventually wear out.
Exactly. Over time, the internal components of
Yeah.
the sensor can degrade,
Huh?
leading to inaccurate readings or complete failure.
So it's not just about the sensor itself,
Right.
but also about the environment it's working in.
Absolutely.
It's a tough job.
It is. And sometimes it's not even the sensor itself.
Oh.
That's the problem. It
Okay.
could be the wiring or the connections.
So even if the sensor is in good shape, a bad connection could throw everything off.
Precisely.
Okay.
Corrosion, damaged wires, loose connections.
Yeah.
All of these can disrupt the flow of information between the sensor and the ECU.
It's like a game of telephone, right?
Yeah.
If the message gets garbled along the way, the engine won't get the right instructions.
That's a perfect way to put it. And then there are external factors to consider.
Right.
Things like debris or fluids
Yep.
getting into the sensor.
Ooh, yeah. I can imagine a little pebble
Yeah,
or some spilled oil could really mess things up.
you're right. These things happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in older cars
Right.
where seals and gaskets might not be as tight.
So we've got wear and tear,
Okay.
wiring issues, external damage.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other culprits we should be aware of?
Well, sometimes it's just bad luck.
Really?
Manufacturing defects happen.
Right.
A sensor might be faulty right out of the box.
So it's like anything else. Sometimes you get a lemon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that different car models
Mm-hmm.
might have specific vulnerabilities.
Okay.
Some sensors might be more prone to certain types of failure
That makes sense.
than others.
So it's really like a combination of factors, a
Mhm.
perfect storm of age,
Yeah.
wear, environmental damage,
Mhm.
and even manufacturing quirks.
Precisely.
Wow.
And that's why understanding these potential causes
Yeah.
can be so helpful.
Okay.
It empowers you to be proactive about maintenance
Right.
and potentially catch problems early on.
So if we want to keep our crankshaft sensors happy and healthy, what are some things we can do besides, crossing our fingers and hoping for the best?
Well, regular maintenance is key.
Okay.
Make sure your mechanic checks the sensor and its wiring
Mm-hmm.
during routine inspections.
So it's like getting a regular checkup at the doctor.
Right.
A little preventative care goes a long way.
Exactly.
I like that.
And be mindful of potential damage
Okay.
if you're working under the hood.
Yeah.
Be careful not to bump or dislodge the sensor.
Right.
And if you notice any fluid leaks, get them addressed promptly.
Got it. Preventative maintenance.
Yeah.
And a little TLC can go a long way.
Absolutely.
But what happens if we do end up needing to replace the sensor?
Okay.
We talked about the cost earlier,
Uh-huh.
but what about the actual process?
Right.
Is it a DIY-friendly job?
Well, like we discussed with the testing,
Right.
it depends on your skill level
Okay.
and comfort working on your car.
Mm-hmm.
Some people really enjoy tackling these projects themselves.
Yeah.
But for others, it's best left to a professional.
Okay. Fair enough. But let's say, hypothetically, I was feeling brave
Right.
and wanted to attempt this myself.
Yeah.
What are the general steps involved, just so I know what I'm getting into?
First and foremost, safety is paramount.
Right.
Always disconnect the battery
Okay.
before working on any electrical components.
Right. Safety first. No accidental shocks for this DIY mechanic.
Exactly.
Okay, what's next?
You'll need to locate the sensor,
Okay.
which is typically mounted on the engine block
Okay.
near the crankshaft pulley.
Okay, that sounds like a good starting point.
Yeah.
Then what?
You'll need to disconnect the electrical connector
Okay.
and then remove the bolts that secure the sensor.
All right, so far so good.
Mm-hmm.
Unplug it, unscrew it. What's the tricky part?
Sometimes the tricky part is actually accessing the sensor.
Oh, okay.
Depending on your car model, it might
Yeah.
be tucked away in a tight spot.
So a little contortionism might be required.
Yeah. You might need some flexible wrenches
Okay.
and a good dose of patience.
All right.
Once you've removed the old sensor,
Mm-hmm.
you install the new one in reverse order.
Okay.
Make sure to tighten the bolts securely
Right.
and reconnect the electrical connector.
Okay, that sounds manageable,
Yeah.
assuming I can actually reach the darn thing.
Right.
But after I've wrestled the new sensor into place,
Uh-huh.
is there anything else I need to do?
It's a good idea to double check all the connections,
Okay.
make sure everything is snug,
Mm.
and then, of course, reconnect the battery
Right.
and start the engine
Okay.
to make sure the new sensor is working properly.
So a final test drive to make sure everything is running smoothly?
Exactly.
Okay.
And if you notice any lingering issues,
Yeah.
it's always best to consult a mechanic.
Right.
Make sure everything is installed correctly.
This has been super helpful.
Good.
I feel like I've gone from crankshaft sensor newbie
Huh?
to, well, at least like a slightly more informed car owner. We've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
from symptoms to testing to even a DIY replacement walkthrough.
Yeah, it's a lot of information.
But before we wrap up,
Okay.
is there anything else we should know about this little component
Let me think.
that plays such a big role in our cars?
Well, there's one more thing I think is worth mentioning.
Okay.
And it's about the bigger picture.
Ooh, I love when we zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
Me too.
What are we talking about here?
We've been focusing on the crankshaft position sensor itself,
Right?
but it's important to remember that it's just one piece
Okay.
of a much larger puzzle.
Okay, so it's not a solo act. It's
Right.
part of a whole engine ensemble.
Exactly. The crankshaft position sensor works in conjunction
Mm-hmm.
with numerous other sensors and systems
Right.
to keep your engine running smoothly.
So even if the crankshaft sensor is working perfectly, other issues could still arise.
Absolutely.
Wow.
For example, problems with the fuel system,
Okay.
the ignition system, or even the timing belt can all affect engine performance
Right.
and potentially mask or mimic symptoms
Yeah.
of a faulty crankshaft sensor.
So it's like a detective novel again.
Yes.
Sometimes you have to consider all the possible suspects before you can crack the case.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that's why it's so crucial to have a holistic understanding of your car's engine
Okay.
and how all the different components interact.
This is blowing my mind. So it's not just about fixing the immediate problem.
Right.
It's about understanding the interconnectedness
Yeah.
of all these systems.
Yes.
It's like a symphony where each instrument has to be in tune and playing its part
Yeah, I like that.
for the music to sound right.
What a fantastic analogy.
Thanks.
And just like a conductor
Mm-hmm.
needs to understand how each instrument contributes to the overall sound,
Right.
a good mechanic needs to be able to diagnose
Yeah.
and address problems within the context of the entire engine system.
I love that. So even though this deep dive has been focused on the crankshaft position sensor, it's really given us a glimpse into the complexity
It has.
and interdependence of all the systems that keep our cars running.
Yeah, it really has.
And it highlights the importance of finding a mechanic you trust,
Absolutely.
someone who can see the bigger picture
Yeah.
and approach car repairs with a holistic mindset. Absolutely. Because sometimes what seems like a simple sensor issue could actually be a symptom of something more complex going on beneath the surface.
And that's where the real detective work begins.
Okay, so we've journeyed pretty deep now into this world of the crankshaft position sensor.
Yeah.
Explored its function, all the chaos it can cause when it fails.
Right.
We even talked about how to play mechanic ourselves a little bit.
Yeah, we did.
But as we've uncovered, it's really just one player
Mhm.
in this super intricate symphony of your engine.
And that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in a machine
Yeah.
as complex as a car, everything is connected.
So let's zoom out for a moment and consider the implications of this interconnectedness.
Okay.
What does it mean for us as car owners?
Well, it means we can't just focus on isolated problems.
Right.
We need to think holistically
Okay.
about our car's health.
So no more Band-Aid solutions.
Right.
We need to treat the whole patient, not just the symptom.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's where a good mechanic becomes invaluable.
Yeah.
You know, they're not just fixing parts.
Right.
They're understanding the interplay of systems and diagnosing problems with a much broader perspective.
It's like a doctor who treats the whole person,
Yeah.
not just the cough or the fever. They're looking for that underlying cause
Right.
and addressing it at its root.
That's a great analogy.
I like that.
It highlights the importance of finding a mechanic you trust,
Yeah.
someone who takes the time to understand your car's history, symptoms, and can really see the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Someone who can connect the dots.
Yeah.
And make sure all the systems are working in harmony.
Yeah.
Speaking of harmony, remember that orchestra analogy
Of course.
from earlier?
Yeah.
It's a perfect way to visualize
Right.
how all the different components of an engine work together.
It is.
And just like a conductor needs to understand
Yeah.
the nuances of each instrument to create that beautiful symphony, a skilled mechanic
Yeah.
needs to have this deep understanding of how each part
Right.
contributes to the overall performance of the engine.
And just like a musician needs to maintain their instrument,
Right.
we need to take care of our cars
Yeah.
through regular maintenance
Hmm.
and prompt attention to any warning signs.
So it's all about prevention.
Yeah.
Early intervention.
Mm-hmm.
A little TLC can go a long way in preventing those automotive headaches down the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, even if you're not a car expert,
Yeah.
you can still empower yourself
Mm-hmm.
with knowledge.
Right.
The more you understand about how your car works,
Yeah.
the better equipped you'll be to communicate with your mechanic
Mm-hmm.
and make more informed decisions
Right.
about repairs and maintenance.
Absolutely. This deep dive has given us such a solid foundation to build upon.
Yeah, it has.
We've learned the ins and outs of the crankshaft position sensor,
Mm-hmm.
explored that web of interconnected systems within the engine,
Right.
even gained some valuable insights into
Yeah.
how to be more proactive car owners.
I think so.
And it's just the beginning, right?
Absolutely.
The world of automobiles,
Yeah.
it's full of these fascinating systems and technologies.
It really is.
It's a journey of continuous learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I, for one, am excited to keep exploring.
Me too.
And remember, every time you start your car,
Yeah.
you're really witnessing the magic of
Yeah.
engineering and the intricate dance of all these interconnected components.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even the smallest parts can play a crucial role.
Absolutely.
So next time you hear that engine purr to life, take a moment to appreciate the symphony of technology happening under the hood.
And be sure to keep those crankshaft position sensors happy.
Wise words. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time for another adventure in the world of knowledge.
That's great.
Until then, happy driving.